Welcome back to the Cognitive Edge. I am your host, Dr. Daniel A. Sabol, and here is where we talk about education, we talk about libraries, technology, and the ideas that humans can make learning better. Um, So today I want to talk about something I think many librarians, especially new librarians, need to hear. Um, that is that programming does not have to be elaborate to be effective. Um, when people first enter the field of librarianship, there can be tremendous pressure to create programs that look impressive and um, to try to keep up with librarians who have been doing it for a very long time. Or you see pictures online of libraries with giant mega spaces, elaborate decorations, escape rooms, robotics competitions, authors, visitors, um, elaborate STEM events, and programs that look like they require 3 months of planning. And some of them may. And you start thinking, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Do I need a huge budget? Do I need 50 people at every program? When I was a new librarian, I used to worry about all these same exact things because you don't really know. Um, does everything really have to look like a major event? And the real answer is no. No. Some of the best library programs are actually very simple. The real question should not be, how impressive can I make this program? Um, it should probably be better if we ask, what does my community need? What does the community need? That distinction matters. It matters a good deal. Mostly it matters. Um, because, programming, it should begin with people, not decorations, not technology, not social media or photographs, and certainly not with the idea that every library program has to be a spectacle. Think about something as simple as a lunchtime book discussion. You put a few books on a table, students come in, and maybe you have some snacks, and maybe you're going to ask a question. What are you reading? And I know that sounds almost so simple to you to probably just start a question as what are you reading, but think about what could happen. One student recommends a book to another. Another student talks, about a character they really connected with. Someone who normally um, does not participate in class starts talking in general and maybe a little bit more about their book. A student discovers a genre that they never considered before. And suddenly you've created a reading community. Um, there's no giant budget, or there was, no complicated technology. It was and it is, you know, what it is. We do what we do. Sometimes we don't have formal lesson plans most of the time. But we know that learning happened, that the connection was made, and that that's programming. And this idea applies far beyond books. Imagine a student coming into the library because they're struggling with research. Um, Instead of creating a 2-hour research seminar, you run a simple 20-minute session. How to know whether a website is reliable is what you call a session you're going to be running. You pull up 3 websites, you examine the author, you are going to look at the evidence that the article presents to you. You're going to check the publication date. You are going to compare the information with another source just to make sure that it all sounds pretty correct. 20 minutes. That's it. That's all. But that 20-minute program could change how a student approaches information for years to come. Um, Now, that is what I would call impact. All librarians need to think about impact more than complexity. One of the mistakes we sometimes make in education is confusing complexity with quality. Complexity with quality. If something requires 20 steps, expensive equipment, 6 staff members, and an elaborate setup, we automatically assume it must be better. And that's not necessarily the truth at all. But learning, it does not work that way. Sometimes the simplest experiences um, create the strongest learning. A librarian might run something called, I don't know, Tech Tuesday. Let's just make something up called Tech Tuesday. And every Tuesday, students or community members can stop by for 30 minutes and ask a technological question. How do I create a spreadsheet? How do I use this database? Um, how do I scan a QR code? Um, how do I format a resume? How do I protect my online privacy? Um, how do I use AI responsibly? You don't necessarily need a presentation, but um, you don't need 30 slides either to really overwhelm people. You don't need an elaborate registration system, but you need a librarian who is available and who's willing to help. That could become one of the most valuable programs in the library. Another simple idea is something I call the 5-minute skill. Every week, teach one small skill. 5 minutes. That's it. Um, Use 5 minutes of your time to teach a skill. So, how to create a strong password, or how to search Google more effectively, or um, how to use quotation marks when searching. how to cite the source, um, how to evaluate an AI generated answer, um, and really how to find an ebook, um, how to request a book from another library, and how to identify misinformation. Each lesson is tiny, um, but over the course of a year, those 5-minute lessons accumulate into significant um, um, resources for you to use again. That is one of the things we sometimes forget about education. Small learning experiences, they compound. Um, we, you don't, you do not always need one massive program. You can build knowledge gradually, and this is especially important for new librarians. I think what happens is people see the superintendent always talking on stage and so forth, and so they think that that's what they are expected to do, but they are not. Um, when you first start working in the library, resist the temptation to immediately create um, 10 new programs. First, observe, watch what other people are doing. Listen to the questions you receive. Pay attention to the problems that keep appearing. If 5 students ask you how to cite websites properly, there's your program right there. If teachers repeatedly ask for help finding credible sources, there's your program. If parents keep asking about online safety, there's your program. If senior citizens they keep asking how to use their phones, then there's your program. And um, if students keep asking how artificial intelligence works, then there's your program. Your community is constantly giving you programming ideas. You have to listen. Um, and there's another important part of this conversation. Um, not every successful program needs 50 people. The librarians sometimes become obsessed with attendance numbers rather than looking at you know quality. So we say, for instance, we had 75 people at this event. Well, that was great, and that is great. Um, but what about a program with 6 students? You know, how do we perceive that? Was it unsuccessful, or um, what happened there? Actually, no, not really. It was not unsuccessful. Suppose 6 students attend a research workshop. One of those students learns how to find scholarly sources for the first time, right? Another learns how to distinguish between a news article and an opinion piece. Then these are small steps. Another student realized that the first Google result is not automatically the best result. And these, such students may walk away with skills they will use throughout their education. These are extremely, extremely important skills to have. Um, and the program mattered. We have to stop measuring every educational experience by how many chairs were filled. Sometimes depth matters more than attendance. Librarians are one of the few people and places where small group learning can happen very naturally. Um, you know, we try to use that advantage, and um, another simple programming strategy is to build programs around questions. You do not always need a complicated activity. Sometimes a great question is enough. Imagine, putting a sign in the library that read, "Should students be allowed to use AI for homework?" Next to it, you place sticky notes. Students, they write their opinion. Teachers respond. Everybody gets um, you know, their voice. Um, you may eventually hold a discussion, and then suddenly the library becomes a place for intellectual conversation. Or consider another question: what book changed the way you think? Um, these are pretty important questions. Students write titles on a board. Um, those recommendations become a display. Very simple. Um, this display becomes a reading list. Um, the reading list becomes a book, or a book discussion. And, one simple question can create multiple layers of engagement. Um, when I do my boards, I tend to ebb and flow with the school and what's happening. So, you know, but that's really smart programming. And here's another idea: let your community help create the programs. The librarians sometimes believe that they have to generate every idea themselves. Not true. You don't. You can ask for help from other librarians. You can ask students for help in coming up with an idea and then building it. What would make you come to the library, right? Ask teachers, what do your students struggle with? Um, can you then hold a couple of sessions for a speaker to come um, and talk to those struggling students? Or you ask families, what information would be useful to you as community members? What would you like to learn? Um, that question alone can completely reshape your programming, 100%. And sometimes the answers will actually surprise you. You're planning a complicated coding workshop while students simply want a quiet place to learn how to play chess. You might be thinking about buying expensive virtual reality equipment while teachers are asking for help teaching students how to evaluate websites. Um, what do you do when you might be developing a huge, evening event when parents really want a 30-minute workshop on predicting their children online? Programming should respond to genuine need. Technology is another area where librarians can easily overcomplicate things. Technology programs, they do not always require expensive equipment. You can run a coding activity using free tools for that matter. Um, you can really teach digital citizenship through discussion, and you can demonstrate AI literacy using examples. Um, you can teach media literacy by analyzing social media posts, or you can teach cybersecurity by, um, showing what makes a strong password. You can teach data literacy using a simple chart from the news to show. The technology is not the program. The learning is the program. That distinction, it has to be made incredibly clear and make it known as incredibly important. Sometimes we get excited about a new tool and then try to invent a reason to use it. But the process should actually work in the opposite direction. Um, Start with the learning needs, really. That's what I would do. Then ask whether technology helps solve it. Very important. Um, if technology does, then great. Use it. If it doesn't, then don't. Technology shouldn't be forced down the throats of students just because it's technology. Um, a marker and a whiteboard can still be powerful, educational technology. So can a conversation, actually. And I think experienced librarians eventually learn something that new librarians may not realize immediately. You do not need to prove your value by exhausting yourself. You have to create elaborate, you don't have to create elaborate programs every week. You don't have to transform every corner of the library. You don't have to constantly produce something bigger than you have done in the past. Sustainable programming matters. If a program takes 12 hours to prepare and lasts 30 minutes, ask whether there is a simpler way to accomplish the same goal. That does not mean lowering standards. That does not mean making it easier. It means, respecting your time. And it means designing intelligently um, and coherent lessons. A program that is simply enough to repeat may actually have more impact than one giant event that happens once. Think about this. A librarian creates a weekly 10-minute research tip throughout the school year. And a librarian creates one enormous research fair, which do you think is going to have the greater impact? The answer depends on the situation, really, but we should not automatically assume the larger event wins. 30 small learning experiences may transform student behavior more effectively than one large event. You know, consistency is definitely power, and programming can also become, you know, an opportunity to really build relationships. A library program is not simply an activity. It gives people a reason to interact with the librarian. Students, they begin to know who you are and what you're about. Um, Teachers begin to see that you, as an instructional partner, are a wonderful person. Parents begin to recognize the library as a source of information. Community organizations begin to understand what the library can offer. Um, those relationships may eventually become more important than the original program. Um, this is why I would encourage every new librarian to remember three questions when developing programming. Okay. What problem are you trying to solve? So, when I did the read around the world, I'd make a bulletin board with a bunch of little books cut out, their covers, and I would put them all over where they came from. And then I would bring a string into the middle of the United States. Who am I trying to help? What is the simplest, meaningful way to do it? If you can answer those three questions, you already have the foundations of a strong program. Don't begin with decorations. Don't begin with technology. Don't begin with the question, um, will this look impressive? Um, begin with need and try something different. Try manga and all the different style books that are out there because you never know. To each student his own taste. Um, because the goal of programming is not to show people how creative the librarian really is. The goal is to create opportunities for learning, discovery, connection, curiosity, and community. Sometimes that might mean a large STEM night with hundreds of people. Well, that's great if you can do that. Sometimes it might mean three students sitting around a table talking about a book. And you know what? That's okay too. Whether it's one student or 100, doesn't matter. What matters is that you caught the student and you were able to have a teachable moment with them. Sometimes it might also mean helping five people learn how to identify misinformation, or sometimes it means teaching one person how to use the library digital resources. Sometimes it means simply creating a space where people feel comfortable asking questions. All of these things matter. And if you're a new librarian and you're feeling pressure to create something enormous, remember this. Always remember this. Start small. Um, find the need. There are many. Create something useful. Okay. See what happens. And then listen to the people who participate. Um, you know, but after that, then you want to do a full 360-degree improvement. Then that's great for you. Run it again. Programming does not have to be elaborate. That is very true. Um, it has to matter. Um, and sometimes the programs that matter the most are the simplest, believe it or not. Um, you don't need a big, giant program to get that done. So, I'm Dr. Daniel A. Sabol, and this is the Cognitive Edge. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep making and looking for simple ways to make a meaningful difference. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.